All right. So it's important that we protect our assets and our business because you never know what might happen. So we live in a very litigious society. Lots can happen. Unexpected things come up that we didn't expect to happen. That's why we get health insurance. That's why we get auto insurance. That's why we get insurance for our house or renter's insurance, whatever the case is. And it's also important, too, that we get insurance on our business and understand how all that works, because it's not the same as getting like a quote from Geico or State Farm or wherever. It's a lot different. So that's why I'm excited to have with me here someone that knows a lot about commercial insurance, especially commercial insurance for the e-commerce world. So really excited to have with me here today Michelle Love from EM Ford. Michelle, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. So, you know, I had first heard you on another podcast years ago, and you always sound so knowledgeable and friendly. And then we got to know each other a little bit more because you were a sponsor for Brand Accelerator Live back last September. So, I was just thinking, I should have somebody on to talk about insurance. I was like, well, Michelle would definitely be the right fit.
Well, I appreciate that. It's been great getting to know you through Scott and some others, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on and help educate your listeners on the confusing topic of insurance with e-commerce sellers.
Yeah, insurance can definitely be one of those things that can be complicated. Now, you're pretty good at breaking things down pretty simplistically. So let's just give everybody a little bit of background in your experience here. What's your background and experience, both the e-commerce side and then the insurance side?
Okay. Well, first of all, I have an accounting degree. That was what I was going to do. I was going to be an accountant. My
Mhm.
husband's a CPA, so I decided not to do that and went into
Mhm.
insurance instead. And I've been a commercial lines insurance agent now for over 26 years and work for a great firm that's in its fourth generation. We're 90 some years in, and we have a staff of about 38 people.
Mm.
And we service all lines of insurance, but I specifically focus on commercial lines insurance. And since I became a seller with Amazon and some other platforms, I have just started focusing on e-commerce insurance because there's a real need out there for somebody that knows both the Amazon, the e-commerce world and the insurance world, and is, you know, reputable and um, straight shooter and not a heavy pusher on those sorts of things, but to really help guide people in those very difficult questions that they may have in regards to insurance. But my daughter and I started our e-commerce business about 5 years ago with Amazon.
Mhm.
I've actually been a seller on eBay for, you know, 15 years or more, but
Oh, wow.
yeah, so I've always kind of piddled at this, but then became more involved in it when I wanted to teach her when she was in high school about starting a business, and this was right up our alley. We love to. She's very creative, and I'm more business side, on the business side. So it was a
Right.
good. And so eventually, I will turn over this one, and then maybe start another one once she finishes college. So.
Okay. That's great. That's great. So you and your daughter started this e-commerce business. What made you decide to get into Amazon from eBay?
Well, kind of funny, but one of our claims lady in our office, she's the one that kind of mentioned it to me, and she started selling because her brother was selling, and he quit his job as an engineer, and so she started doing some e-commerce selling on Amazon, and she said, you may be interested in this. And so we were just talking one day at lunch, and then next thing you know, I'm spending 2 or 3 months, researching and learning. And then I took Scott's class and just felt like he was doing things the right way and teaching. And so it just kind of developed into that. We actually started looking for Sweet 16 birthday supplies for my daughter and had
Oh,
a hard
yeah.
time finding them. And so that's kind of where the inspiration came from.
Cool. 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 So you both do e-commerce, excuse me, selling, as
Mhm.
well as you have um, the insurance side of things with understanding. So help people understand. Um, let's talk about some basics between personal lines and commercial lines, because most people don't even really understand that there's a difference.
Yeah, they don't. Right. And when we're talking e-commerce, a lot of people might think that their personal lines homeowners policy covers them if they have their products in their home, or if the liability, or if they're in their car driving to UPS and have a wreck. But their personal lines policy actually has an exclusion in it for business operations. So you hear that a lot, that, oh, my homeowners or my auto will cover me, or my umbrella will cover me. And the umbrella is just a policy over top of those underlying policies. And there's no coverage there either, unless you have it endorsed on, by the company. So that brings in the need for a commercial lines policy to cover you for your business pursuits.
Gotcha. So basically, personal lines is the things for you as a individual, like your auto insurance, your homeowner's insurance, your renter's insurance, whatever type of insurance. Whereas the commercial policy is for the business. So, what are the basics of commercial policies? Like, what is involved in that?
Well, most of the time, people just take out the liability, and that's a protection for your premises liability. If you have like a warehouse that you're leasing, the landlord wants to see that you have premises liability. If you have a storefront, you need premises liability in case somebody falls coming into your facility. And then you have your product liability coverage. There's some other liabilities built in there for like slander and libel and those sorts of things. But the product liability is the big one for e-commerce sellers, because you need to make sure that you're protected in the event that your product hurts somebody, or burns down a house, or hurts somebody. So that's the big one within a commercial lines policy for e-commerce sellers.
Gotcha. So it really comes down to product liability is kind of the big thing. So when is, like, let's say Amazon require you to have it? Now, most people listening to this tend to be very Amazon focused, but maybe even someone that has a Shopify store, it still might be important for them to have. But let's talk about at least where you're required to have it, and we can kind of go from there.
Yeah. The terms of service, if you're a professional seller on Amazon, so if you're paying the $39 a month fee, then you're a professional seller, and your terms of service requires you to have product and general liability, and name Amazon as an additional insured on your policy. I know Walmart.com has their requirements, and Chewy and all the other platforms have the same requirements. Some police it a little better than others, but the minimum requirement with Amazon is a $1 million product and general liability policy. And in most cases, I can just combine that into one policy, depending on what products you're selling, because then it gets, I have a little, it's, there's categories that are lower risk and categories that are higher risk. So depending on what you're selling, it depends on which policy I sell. But I know I'm very familiar with requirements from all of the big e-commerce sites, and therefore, if you're selling on those sites, I know what you need. So
Gotcha. So, like, for example, I'm looking on Amazon's terms of service. I pulled it up. So it's basically 10,000 US dollars. You're supposed to have it, right? That's based on monthly sales.
there's a lot of question about that. I think that there's some revisions to that they got rid of that about 3 years ago. And that
Oh,
if you're a professional seller, period, you have to have it. But if you're a individual seller, I think is what they call it, then you can meet those thresholds before they require it.
and that's a good point, because I was actually looking on a couple different pages, which we can link to in the show notes, where it's like it is kind of vague. Like, it made it seem like in the professional seller, it was just like you need to have it. So that is it's a good point, because I had even thought it was the 10,000, but it doesn't really say.
Mm-mm.
It doesn't even say monthly. It just says insurance limits means the applicable one of the following, and it just says, or insurance threshold means one of the applicable following. But then it also says, the amounts you're supposed to have. So 1 million US dollars.
Yes.
So what exactly does that mean?
That means your occurrence limit on your general liability and your product liability is $1 million. And then you have what we call an aggregate limit that in most cases is doubled. So it's 2 million. So basically that means that you could have two $1 million claims, different
Hmm.
claims in any one policy year, or four $500,000 claims. But the minimum occurrence per any one claim is 1 million.
Okay, so that means it protects you up to $1 million.
Yes.
So let's talk in our non-lawyer, this is not legal advice, but just general philosophy of how insurance works. Because I used to work in an insurance agency, so we were talking offline. My experience is more in health insurance. So when it comes to property and casualty and commercial lines insurance, I know a little bit, just enough to be dangerous and ask some dangerous questions. So let's ask this question. So let's say someone has $1 million per occurrence. So occurrence means one time thing happens to one person, whereas aggregate, like you mentioned, it could be multiple claims.
Right.
So let's say the person was suing for $5 million. Does that mean you're on the hook for the other four?
Yes, you would be. Yes.
Now, theoretically, if you've protected your personal assets and you have an LLC, then you could potentially, now you want to talk to a lawyer about this, protect you. Because oftentimes, as I understand it from lawyers I've talked to, if there is a lawsuit, the first thing they're looking at is in a policy, what is covered, because that's the easiest low hanging fruit, so to speak, to
Right.
not have to go into like a very expensive court battle, which again, we're not providing legal advice here. It's just a thought in the general philosophy of how all this works. I know people have questions about that.
Yes. Yeah. And it is true that they do go into and look at the policy, and then they look at, basically your net worth. I mean, if somebody I could sue, anybody for $100 million,
Hmm.
and they may only have a net worth of 50,000. I'm not gonna get 100 million. That,
Right.
you never rule in that favor. So basically it's a good guide to have your insurance limits to kind of match up with what your net worth is. So we can always add an umbrella coverage, which there again goes over top, commercial umbrella, and that
Hmm.
goes over top of the commercial liability limits that you have under your policy, and that gives you more protection. So if you're a large e-commerce seller that has employees, that has vehicles out on the road, that has a lot of exposures, then I definitely suggest an umbrella. It's um, much cheaper than having to come out of your pocket in the event that you're sued and high limits are requested in the case.
Gotcha.
But
Well, that's a good point. Now, let's talk about another kind of basic philosophical thing, because I've heard people say this over the years. Well, I have a limited liability company, so that means it limits my liability. So I don't have to worry about that because I have a veil of protection. So why do I even need insurance? Because they can't come after me because I have a limited liability protection or company that protects me from limited by liability.
well, again, not a lawyer, but if you're going to sell on Amazon, it's in the terms of service that you have the insurance, and there's a reason for that, because they know that really, an LLC or any type of structure that you're set up as, um, is only it only provides so much protection. Again, consult with an attorney. We have some really good resources there as well. And it's just not always the case um, that you have that protection that you think you might just from setting up an LLC. Um, the big one also is you're not in compliance with Amazon's terms of service or
Right.
Walmart.
So yeah, so to that point, whether it's you're selling on Amazon or you're not selling on Amazon, you got to abide by the terms of service of whatever platform you're selling on. So if it's Amazon, have enough insurance for Amazon. If it's let's just say you're not selling on Amazon, it's your own platform, and you're saying you're going to protect yourself with your own limited liability company structure, and that's enough. Well, again, we're not lawyers, but everything I've ever looked into says there's certain formalities you have to kind of abide by if you were ever to get sued,
Mhm.
which would protect you because you at least kind of checked off certain boxes, like filing your annual reports with your state, having a bank account, keeping money separate, um, and keeping expense separate, and filing properly. But then I've always heard too, insurance is one of those things because at least you're trying to have everything. Whereas if you didn't have insurance, again, a lawyer could better explain this, but oftentimes you're at least saying, I'm trying to create a buffer by having the insurance. But if you don't have the insurance, you're more likely to, as they would say, pierce the veil. That's kind of what I've heard.
Right, and I think that's I think that's a true statement, um, because, if you are doing things the right way and doing all the filings and doing your sales tax reports and running a business, insurance is part of having a business. And if you're doing things the right way and have that, then, the courts look at it a little more, that you're doing things as a true business.
Right. You're doing things the right way. Okay. So, well, let's talk about when things go awry.
Yeah.
So, you and I were talking offline about the example of what seemed like a pretty benign product, but it's now going into the appeals court and Amazon's involved and all that. So, there's a case which I'll let you go into a little bit more detail on. Of, I guess it was a dog collar that snapped
Yes.
and basically blinded someone, which you'd be like, how did that even happen? So, do you mind sharing just a little bit of, as you understand it, the details of that case and how that affects Amazon as a company?
Yeah, and you can just Google this. Your listeners can, and just do a search for Amazon um, case with dog collar breaking, and you can
Hmm.
probably find the court documents and kind of follow it, which is what I'm doing as well. But it looks like it was around January of 2015 that a lady, I think she's in Pennsylvania, was walking her dog. She bought the collar from Amazon, which was a third party seller fulfilled by Amazon, and her dog pulled, and it snapped back, blinded her, I think, her left eye. She appealed it, went on up, and basically, and I think this is the most recent correspondence I know on it, is a federal appeals court has given this lady now the green light to sue Amazon over the damages of Amazon's third party vendors product. So that's a huge, huge case in the realm of Amazon and e-commerce sellers, third party sellers on Amazon, that in Amazon, in my opinion, is going to have pushback on that, in that they're going to start policing their third party sellers to provide the certificate of insurance that's required. Basically, when you take that, when you take out that policy and we write it, we add Amazon as an additional insured under ABC company's policy. And what that does is it gives, um, it not only protects ABC company, but it also protects Amazon under that same policy. And it does not pierce or go into Amazon's insurance realm, because Amazon's an additional insured under your policy. So and that's a normal setup. That there's nothing unusual about that. Anytime that you lease a location from somebody, um, there are lots and lots and lots of scenarios that we add additional insureds. It's very common to do if you're doing business with somebody, that they want to see that you are naming them as an additional insured under their policy. So this is nothing unusual that Amazon is doing, but they need to be a little more proactive on it. And I mean, they have a lot of sellers. I mean, I don't even know what the number is, but I know it's, over 50% of the sellers are third party sellers on Amazon. And those people are going to need insurance. They should have insurance already, but
Right.
I'd say about 1%, actually adhere to it.
Yeah. Having worked in two Fortune 500 companies, I know that like pendulums swing sometimes pretty quickly, especially if the company is um in trouble because of having to pay out money that they don't feel that they should have had to pay.
Mhm.
So I would imagine there probably would be some sort of like Amazon policing now and saying, yeah, we are going to not just put it in terms of service and say, well, we told you, but like actually require some sort of documentation.
Yes.
Because as I've seen the history with Amazon, they tend to be very reactive, understandably so, in
Mhm.
those type of situations when they're kind of like the government, so to speak, is like forcing their hand. So in this case, I could see that they wouldn't want to just keep paying stuff out, because when you think about it, if you're an executive in a company, your job is to look good to your bosses and not have to have uncomfortable conversations of why things happened. So it's like a fool me once type thing, but if it keeps happening again, people high up are probably going to lose their jobs over it. So their insurance, so to speak, and their job is to say, well, we're going to require third party sellers to provide something. This is just a theory of ours. It's already in terms of service, but I would imagine they would be a little more vigilant on it. So it's better to get in front of that curve, because sometimes Amazon can be kind of blunt and when they enforce something.
Exactly, they really can be. And basically, this decision is shooting down Amazon's defense that they've used for years, that they're only providing the platform, and now it's basically saying that these the Amazon will actually start bearing the responsibility if and they along with the vendor, and if the vendor doesn't have insurance, then it comes into Amazon's insurance. Um, and it's not going away. It's just going to be there. It's going to continue. There's still going, there's going to be more and more claims that go uninsured on the vendor side that are pushed back, and Amazon will have to pay out on. And again, when that happens, they're going to start, breaking, making sure that people have the coverage that they need.
Yeah, I would definitely imagine that's the case. All right, so then let's talk a little bit about like having an insurance policy. What does it look like? So we can talk a little bit about, first start off with, what do you need to do to get an insurance policy, and then how do you make sure you have the right insurance policy for your business? So let's talk a little bit about like, what does it look like when someone says, okay, I'd like to get insurance? Do they just go to geico.com and have a quote in 10 minutes?
Yeah, they could, and they may not have the coverage when the claim is hit. But Amazon is requiring product liability coverage, and that's not something that your State Farms, your Farm Bureaus, your Geico's, Progressive, none of those companies write this type of coverage. And there's a lot of factors at play. One being, in most cases, or a lot of the cases, it's Chinese manufactured products. And you, as ABC company, are now considered the manufacturer because there's no recourse against Chinese manufacturers.
Hmm.
So, with that alone, a lot of companies, if they know that, if they understand e-commerce and they understand what, the whole world of Amazon, the third-party seller world is, then, they know they can't write the insurance. And that's where it comes into more of a specialty type line of coverage, that you really need somebody that knows what they're doing. And there's, a few of us out there that do it the right way. But, we can't, I could quote this all day long online and issue them left and right, but it may not be, the company may come back a year from now and cancel. I mean, there's, one of the companies, it's a big national carrier, and I've represented them for years. And I see policies. People will send me their policy and say, "Do I have the right coverage?" And I'm like, "Well, I represent the same company, and I know for a fact that they don't do this. They don't write e-commerce for third-party vendors sourcing from China. Period." Um, but as an insurance agent, I could quote these all day long and write them, and for $500 minimum premium, but you're not getting the coverage you actually need to protect you in the event that you have a claim. So there's so many different factors that go into it. The product itself, your sales volume, your history. Do you have a history of claims or bankruptcies? Those sorts of things. A lot of factors go into it. But in most cases, I'm pretty successful in placing it with a national carrier that writes in all the states and, um, has a great reputation and basically has your back in the event that you have a claim. And I know what you need as far as the limits and coverages and endorsements. So I add on every policy, I add an additional insured endorsement, and I do it as a blanket for whether you're on Amazon or you start doing on Chewy or Walmart.com, you're covered no matter where. And it also covers you, in your own Shopify store or your eBay store or whatever it might be, just any, or if you're at a trade show, it doesn't matter. It goes with you. And then I also add a worldwide coverage, which gets very confusing. But if you start selling on, the Canadian or UK markets, those sorts of things, then the Amazon.uk has a requirement to be named on your policy. And in the event that there's a claim, it would have to be brought, and this is a general all across the board on liability claims, they have to be brought in the United States for territorial reasons. So I add a worldwide coverage endorsement on all of my quotes as well to provide you coverage in the event that you sell a product to somebody in Paris and it hurts their dog or it hurts their child. They don't have to, you have coverage wherever they file their claim. So
Okay,
that's
that
really
makes sense. Yeah, because that's important because you never know. Because one of the interesting things is you mentioned you might have a policy, but it might not pay out when you need it, and that's I think a concept people don't always necessarily understand. Is that like in personal lines, and I'll even talk health insurance. Health insurance now is so protected because it used to be, they would look for every way to get out of paying. Oh, that's
Mhm.
pre-existing condition. So if you have an Affordable Care Act compliant policy, chances are whatever it's supposed to cover, it will cover as long as it's an in-network physician and yada, yada, yada. Um, it'll cover what it's supposed to cover. And then when you start getting into like auto insurance, as long as, everything is, it really is the right car and, you didn't just give it to your roommate and didn't tell them about it or something like that, it's going to cover what's going to cover. When you start getting into business insurance, now there's less protections because this is my personal philosophy is I think the governments, the insurance commissioners, everybody's trying to protect consumers because consumers, there's kind of a thought like they wouldn't know better. Whereas when you're the business owner, kind of the philosophy is, well, you should have known better. And if you didn't, well, shame on you. And so there's so many variables involved in businesses too that it's almost like, well, you should have asked the question better to your insurance agent. It was
Right.
kind of like, I think the general philosophy. So that's why I think it's good when you talk to somebody that understands that type of business, because just for context, if you are getting a quote on commercial insurance, if you sell yachts or you sell something in e-commerce, spatulas or something, that's gonna be a lot different than if you also have a hair salon or if you know, have a limousine company. I mean, there's so many different types of businesses
Yeah.
that things get very murky quickly.
And that's so true. It really is. And unfortunately, there are those agents out there that just want to, have a mass amount of writing these accounts for $500. But then, what happens is the insurance company at renewal time looks at it. And these policies are audited each year as well. So when the company auditor comes out or calls and says, I need proof of your sales for, the last 12 months. You send them your Amazon, you know, sheet, sales summary, and they're like, oh, you sell on Amazon, you're an e-commerce seller. Oh, well, we don't cover those. Even though the
Mm,
agent may or may not have known that they don't cover them,
right.
uh, then the policy gets canceled.
Gotcha. Yeah. And the interesting thing is like, I'll just say this, and I mean this in a positive light, but having worked in the insurance business, there's a lot of agents that even well intentioned, and they're
Mhm,
not trying to like
mhm,
just blanketly write policies and, negligently leave things out. Even when they are trying to do the right things, even if they're talking to the underwriters and asking the right questions from the client, if they don't know how all the things flow, sometimes you could end up with a policy where it's like, too bad on you. You signed it.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it's not just those that might just be doing it for the rush of applications they can get in, but there are plenty of agents out there, well intentions, that don't handle product liability and don't really know the questions to ask, or um, don't realize they're not protecting their insured properly. And that's where, it really becomes important to know, work with somebody that actually knows this business and can ask, my application, which is online, ask the questions that I need to make sure that I'm covering you the right way. And I actually send that application to my insurance company versus just quoting it online. I mean, I quote it online, but I attach the application. So my underwriters do see exactly what you fill out. And whether it says sourcing from China, or I'm doing, here's my storefront link, they look at your Amazon storefront and determine if it's a right fit for them or not, even though I kind of do the front line. I mean, if you submit an application for baby products or pet supplies, I know it doesn't go to this one company because they don't do
Mm.
those. I know to send it to a broker that writes with other companies, and that's just part of my learning of the e-commerce insurance world. So
Yeah, it's a good point. So just so everyone kind of has a little bit of a background in the insurance business. So, you have an agent who, generally speaking, like, for example, you don't work for Liberty Mutual or whoever it is that you're selling. You're usually representing them. And
right,
so typically, even though you're selling to the customer legally, oftentimes you're really more representing the insurance company than you are the client. Now, granted, most insurance agents, they look at themselves as they're really on the client's side because the client's the one who's paying the bill. So, that's kind of the way the relationship is legally.
yes,
But on the other end, oftentimes, especially with commercial, it's going through an underwriter. The underwriter is essentially almost a goalie. Their job is to keep out the bad stuff. Now, but at the same time, too, they can't keep everything out. So they're like a goalie who has to let stuff in. So their job is to maybe help ask the right questions, be another um, net, so to speak, to keep business out that maybe the insurance company doesn't want, or make sure it's written properly. But at the end of the day, they're still trying to, they still have, if they don't let anything in, they're probably going to lose their job.
right,
Now, on the flip side, if it comes to a claim, there's claims people. Now, the claims people's job is to pay as least as possible. And even if they have to completely throw their friend, the underwriter, under the bus, they will keep from paying out claims. And the biggest thing they look for is the policy not structured correctly. And that's with all lines. It's not just e-commerce, commercial, that's in general. So it's just kind of understanding how that flows. And that's why I think it's important you talk to someone that understands the right boxes to check and the right words to put on the application. Otherwise, that third person we just mentioned is going to have a field day and just taking their little rubber stamp out and saying denied.
right. And that's where I've worked very closely with my carriers, my insurance companies, and developing the application we use online to make sure that it asks the questions that are really truly pertinent. And it's not an Accord app, which is the standardized app that's used in all insurance worlds.
Right.
Um, but it basically fills in the information that's needed for rating and for determining acceptance within different insurance companies. And then we do the Accord app after we, sell the policy. So, yeah.
Gotcha. All right. So another question that is going to come up here and probably in some people's minds is, as we are recording this, it's very timely to talk about the coronavirus. Now, somebody could be listening or watching this in the future and say, we have so much more context than you guys had back when you recorded this. But either way, it's probably going to be somewhat fresh in people's minds of like, okay, weird stuff happens. So whether it be, it's affecting their business sales, or just worry about what if someone gets sick because of my product. Like, let's dive a little bit into those type of scenarios.
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of research in the last couple of weeks regarding the coronavirus. Just a horrible time in our whole world right now in relation to that. And of course, the insurance questions have come along the same line, and not just on e-commerce accounts, but business income replacement and business extra expense coverage. That's the question we get the most right now, and that is unfortunately not covered under any type of business commercial lines policy in regards to this specific virus, because you have to have it's a property coverage form coverage, and you have to have some sort of trigger on the property side to be able to collect your replacement income and your replacement expenses. And in the event of just the beauty shops are shut down, the gyms are shut down, the restaurants are losing, they can only do takeout. They're all losing income, and still have to, in some cases, pay their employees, a salary or whatever. Unfortunately, there's no provisions within a business insurance policy to cover those. In addition to that, there are specific exclusions under a business or a commercial insurance policy for civil authority and for viruses. So even if, there are those exclusions in there that, if the governor shuts down all restaurants in your state, you still can't claim, and you still can't claim the lost income.
Or if Amazon says we're not allowing FBA shipments inbound for whatever period of time.
Yes, and that's the question that's coming up on the e-commerce accounts. I mean, I think right now I'm looking at my list. I think there are only 6 categories that you can, you can send in fulfillment to your centers right now through April 5th, I believe. But if you write or you sell insurance or you sell products outside of those 6 and you can't fulfill and you're out of inventory at the fulfillment centers, you obviously you're losing income. You can't send in your replacement items, but there's still no trigger there. There's no product or there's no property damage to trigger
Mm.
that lost income. On a general basis on these policies, I don't normally include that because, like again, I said it's a property coverage form, and most people are only asking for what Amazon requires, which is the liability side. In the event that I write your contents in a third-party fulfillment warehouse or your own warehouse, that's a property form, and I always include a little bit of business income in that instance. For claims like if your warehouse caught on fire and you had 3 months until you could get your sea shipments back in to replenish, then you do have that is a trigger to the business income and extra expense.
Okay,
So,
that's a
okay,
good way to explain it.
yeah.
So, what about if someone, and some of this might be, there might not even be case law on this, but what
Tell me.
if you sold a product and all of a sudden someone claimed they got coronavirus because they used your cup or something like that?
Yeah, and people can claim anything. And that's the other thing with these policies. You have defense coverage built into your
Hmm.
liability, and that in a lot of cases is way more than any judgment that may ever come out of court. But with the claim such as that, again, there's an exclusion for viruses, so there would not be any coverage.
Gotcha. Now, if someone tried to sue you saying, I got a virus because of your product. Now, again, how would someone even track it back to you or whatever? But let's just say someone did. Um, let's just go with this thought experiment. Would your defense coverage be excluded, meaning they wouldn't defend you in court over that?
Well, it wouldn't go to court in that instance. Basically, if we received a claim and somebody's, you know, say ABC company got a suit that said that they had a cup caused the virus. ABC company gets sued. They send us, our agency, the suit. We submit it to the company for For a claim, we always submit it. We don't determine any of that coverage within our office. Um, the company adjusters will use there might be an expense to do some investigation, those types of things, and that's covered within your policy.
Hmm.
They would most, in 99% of the cases, send it in a denial letter and say, I'm sorry, but there's no coverage for this claim. And that closes the claim. And therefore, if it goes to court, there's no defense coverage because the claim is closed. But there,
Gotcha. Now, what I
yes,
will say on that one though is having been in like restaurants, for example, and earlier in my career, like it's almost impossible to sue a restaurant to say you got sick. And that's a restaurant where you're ingesting something. So if you have a non-ingestible product, or even if you had an ingestible product, it's almost impossible to prove that they got it from you. So one, why would someone even think that they got it from your product? And two, even if they did, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get anywhere. So it's probably one of those things that sometimes with insurance too, it's how much risk are you really protecting yourself from? Because it may not even be an issue. So
exactly. And some things are just not insurable, and that's just the way it is. In that same scenario, if somebody is claiming that they maybe it's a sippy cup and the lid came off and their child got burned by whatever was in it. I'm just throwing something out there.
sure.
Then they get the suit. We submit the claim. There would be coverage for defense because that would probably go on into a court hearing of some sort. And then, all that coverage is covered under your policy, which again, in the event of a claim for those sorts of things, the defense coverage is usually pretty high, and that's covered under the policy if it's a covered loss under the policy.
Gotcha. So the bottom line is have insurance. It's a good idea to have it for a variety of reasons we talked about. Make sure it's set up properly because otherwise it's almost like you're paying for nothing if it's not set up properly. And you can't necessarily go back later on and say, well, I want a refund.
Right.
Insurance doesn't work that way, even if it
It
wasn't set up properly.
No.
So it's definitely a good idea to talk to someone who knows what they're talking about. So if somebody wanted to talk to you either about setting up insurance or just having a look at their current policy to see, make sure it's set up properly or see if you can get better pricing, wherever the case is, wherever they go to reach out to you.
Well, we're very prominently out on the internet under EM Ford Insurance, or you can search FBAquotes.com. Um, Either way, you come up to a landing page with you can get our website is geared toward e-commerce because that's where most of the traffic comes from is the e-commerce accounts. So it's very prominent out there to get a quote for an e-commerce policy. You just click it, answer, a couple of pages of questions or drop downs and just fill out whatever you can on there. If I'm missing something, I'll email you back. But once I get that application in, then I typically turn these around within a couple of days at the most. If it's a low risk type policy, I can get those turned around quicker. If it's pets, babies, food, those sorts of things, then it goes through a broker and it takes just a couple of days longer in some cases. But basically, that's the best way to get me. You can also email me at mlove@em4.com. I'm also in a bunch of Facebook groups out there. I stay active in those as well without self-promoting, but more information purposes to help people that have insurance questions. And I'm also always open to reviewing whatever coverage you have in place just to see if I think you're missing something or if I think it's a good policy, what I would recommend, those sorts of things. And I'm pretty straightforward with that. I don't try to, you know, push you to cancel that policy and take it with me unless I think it's something that is really detrimental to you and not really covering you. So, I'm there to help you all. And we have a really great service team as well. I have one lady in our office that's all she does is e-commerce insurance servicing. So she's helping me with renewal applications and certificates of insurance, and just the day-to-day servicing, payments, and such. And then we have a dedicated claims lady in our office who's also an e-commerce seller. And then we have a support staff of 30 some other people that can always fill in if needed. But so we're very versed within our office. Like my owners are in their late 30s, early 40s, and they are very interested in pursuing more of the e-commerce insurance world. Whether it's selling on e-commerce sites, or just handling insurance for just general businesses around the U.S. We're set up to do that, being licensed in most all the states, and pretty much stay intact with the insurance laws within those states. I've been doing this 26 years. I'm past chair of our state insurance association that oversees all the insurance agents within our state of Kentucky. And I have a passion to help people make sure they have the right coverage that they need. And I don't sell things that I don't think you need. I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. Our integrity and the way we conduct business is truly more important to me than trying to sell a policy that you don't need. So.
Great, great. I definitely recommend someone check out fbaquotes.com or reach out to you if they have questions. You've always been helpful whenever I've reached out to you, and I know you did a lot to help people over at Brand Accelerator Live as well. So, all right. So I really appreciate having you on. This was a very good information for me, and I even have been from the insurance world, so I always learn quite a bit whenever I talk to you. So really appreciate it.
Okay, well, I appreciate you having me on, and look forward to helping some of your clients.
All right, good deal. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.